RJ, so good to see you again. Welcome back to the Mark Divine Show. And I
That
appreciate your persistence in finally getting this done.
yeah, man. I'm like a dog on a bone, man. I
Yes, you
just
are.
will not quit.
Well, we had that whole one where I forgot to record the darn thing. That's hilarious.
Well,
No, that's
actually,
right. We had technical issues, right? With some weird clicking sound.
yeah, yeah,
Anyway.
yeah. And then I finally got you on, and it worked. So that was good. Good news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you know that I have a world record in burpees.
No shit.
Yeah. So we have the world record for a 6-person team, most burpees in 24 hours.
I had no idea. That
In
that
fact,
is that is bizarre.
that's what this is right here. So it's a most burpees in 24 hours mixed team, 35,393 achieved by Mark Devine, Melanie Sluka, Greg Amundsen, Catherine Devine, and Jim Bro, and Elizabeth Fulop from Australia. September
Wow.
11th, 2018.
Oh, so it was like a 9/11 thing, yeah? Was it for
Yeah,
yeah,
we did it
okay.
on 9/11. We filmed it. It took forever for Guinness to finally, view because COVID then happened right after that, and all the film was stuck in their headquarters, and they weren't going into the office. So it literally took until late last year before we finally got the actual certificate. But so
That
you're
is
going to go for a record? Is it going to be an individual?
yeah, so I'm going to go for 11,000 in 24 hours.
Awesome.
You know what? I should get you to train me because I actually so the way I'm training is like I do for an ultra, but I don't know if it's appropriate. So what I'm trying to do is build time on, I guess, feet, right? So like like anything when you're running, it sucks, and then I figured like I do burpees, it sucks, and kind of getting used to just continuous burpees, and
Yeah.
now I can do burpees for about an hour or two continuously. I would have to do 8 for 30 seconds and then rest for 30 seconds. That's kind of how I would need to go for
Yeah.
24
That sounds
hours.
right.
But I don't really know what's going to happen in hour 10. Where am I know my glutes are probably going to start to feel it. I know my chest might become a bit weird,
Sure.
but
Well, you
I'm
know what? You just like endurance training, your body will adapt as long as you're training the right things. And with burpees, it's just burpees, right?
hmm,
So you're right in doing quantity, but strategy is really important, right? So just you can't just dive in and
hmm.
just do as many burpees as you can, like you know that. So your strategy of 8 on, 30-second rest, do 8, do 30. So that might work. There might be a different strategy to consider because you might want to have a little bit of recovery each hour that's longer than that 30 seconds.
Hmm.
It's time to do a little stretching, little mobility, right?
Hmm.
A little spinal health. I'll share that our strategy was everything, right? So the former world record for our 24-hour period for 6 people was 14,000. We did 35,000,
Yeah, he
and it
smashed
was
it.
it was all in the strategy. The structure was amazing. Offline, I'll
Really?
share that with you. I don't want to
Yeah,
share our
that'd be
secret
great.
sauce.
Yeah, you got to give me the secret sauce, Mark. Come on. Yeah.
I don't want to. I don't want to share it publicly because someone might be gunning for that same record, right? You'll be like, "Oh no." Anyway, so good to see you. Wow, how are things going? You look healthy. You look things going well.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's 7 a.m. here in Melbourne, and I I'm I'm I've got little kids, and so um I'm continuously having to kind of augment my routine to serve them, but also my wife, right? In terms of
Sure.
just being a husband and being an available dad and not getting caught up in my own
Yeah,
um,
importance.
selfishness. Yes, yes, and because Mark, our wives, they don't buy that shit, right? Like
No, no,
they
they
don't
know who
drink
we
it.
really are. They're like, yeah,
Yeah,
whatever that thing is you're
yes,
putting out in the
yes,
world, that's
yes.
doesn't concern me. What
Yeah,
concerns
yeah,
me
yeah,
is the kids and what's
yeah,
right in
yeah.
front of me.
Yeah.
Is
Did
yeah,
you do the laundry?
exactly. That's awesome. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, that's I call it life being lifey.
yeah,
Ultimately, we're doing these things really just to express ourselves in the world, but doesn't mean we do them in spite of life happening or in addition to life happening. It
mm,
is life happening, right? And so if
yeah,
we're not taking care of all the other important things while we're doing this, whatever this is. For you, it's Ultra Habits. For me, it's Seal Fit
Mm,
and my corporate training and podcasting.
mm,
Life happens through that. And so ultimately balance isn't like this tug of war between work and personal life. It's an interweaving of everything to find over time some sort of harmony. A completely different way of looking at balance, more of a holistic approach.
I find, Mark, that, and I think you could relate, like, given my DNA, if I wanted to put my head down and do crazy things in terms of like trying to break a Guinness Book of World Records
Yeah,
every
that
year,
stuff is easy.
I could. Yes.
It's
Yes,
actually
it's yeah, it's trying to include others in my life and having space for
hmm
others, sacrifice for others, and being there, with family. That's the challenge, and
yeah,
yeah, and so that's the part, right?
that's awesome. I look forward to we can talk more about that kind of. That's a great meta kind of topic here because I love your story.
Mm,
I love talking to people who like you. You're. Let me back up a little bit. I am getting inundated with people who want to be on my podcast who are just writing the latest book. Right? They're putting out their latest book, and they're a lot. Most of them are just very smart academics, scholars, consultants, or all the above. They've had a fairly, predictable life path, right? Decent childhood. They got into the great schools, they got their masters, then they got their PhDs, and next thing you know, they're writing the book about happiness, or they're writing the book about distractions, and they're writing the book about whatever happening in the cultural norm edges. And some of these are interesting conversations, but I feel like they're pretty formulaic. Um, I also feel like I'm a little bit being used as, a shout
mm.
box for them. And so it's like I'm starting to resent some of that a little bit and thinking, well, gosh, I want to have conversations with real people. Not that
Yeah,
they're not real people, but
yeah,
people of
yeah,
like,
yeah,
maybe their PhD is from the School of Hard Knocks instead of
yeah, yeah,
Stanford,
yeah,
and maybe
yeah,
they don't not, maybe their life is their book. They're not trying to pitch a piece of paper,
yeah,
um, which is going to just bring them some more ego identity
yeah,
and another line on their resume. And you have a PhD from the School of Hard Knocks.
yeah,
I'm not saying you're not going to write a book called Ultra Habits, and that would be a great book. I can't wait to read it. I'm just saying you are the book. Your life is an expression. So give us
yeah.
so listeners don't know your background. What's the story of
Mm.
your how did you get your PhD in hard
Yeah,
knocks?
that's a
Yeah, tell us
yeah.
about that. So then we can kind of get into like how do you
Yeah,
how do you
that's a
then how do you
yeah.
translate that into becoming an elite athlete and
Yeah.
soon to be world record holder and a
Mm.
father and balancing it all and actually having a pretty damn cool life.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think that, to your point, some people come to performance and they're interested in performance because they've kind of always been optimized, right?
Right.
Like that's not the case for me. Like I
You were
every
de-optimized.
I was not only de-optimized, Mark, but the way I was living was killing me, right? As an addict, hardcore meth addict, with
Wow.
alcoholism as well. I think I'm a primary alcoholic, but
How many years ago was that like the
yeah. So,
force?
so I got caught up in the meth wave in California. I grew up in the Bay Area. I was 17, and this was 1998, and I
98.
was heavily addicted to drugs and alcohol to the age of 26.
Wow.
So it wasn't decades, but my addiction and attachment to substances was profound. It was like at a spiritual level. Like the moment I drank, there was a connection there and a light turned on that I
hmm
had never switched on prior to that,
Right.
and I chased that. and then I met methamphetamine at age 17. I was an elite athlete.
Okay.
I was in the Olympic development program in soccer. I played in California, which is a very competitive state to play soccer because of, we got a big Latin American community. It's a big state. You're in California, so you know the gig.
Yeah.
And like when I was out on the soccer field, I felt a sense of control and a sense of flow that all I wanted to do was play soccer. So like I would not even go to school, and I would cut class and go to the soccer field on my own and just practice. But when I met alcohol and drugs, what happened was I realized I could achieve that feeling faster. It was a
Mm-hmm.
hack. And it was
Mm-hmm.
much more profound as well, right? Like you're not out there on a soccer field off your face, like in euphoria, right? So I went through that struggle, particularly around the age of 17, 18, of trying to do both. I got involved in the juvenile justice system, so I became a ward of the court. Good family, an immigrant family, immigrant story, but they didn't know how to cope. And as a last ditch effort, my senior year in high school, I went to Belgium. I got off house arrest, and the judge knew I had an opportunity to go play soccer in Belgium, and I went to Belgium, and the thought was I'd stay out there my last year in high school, and I was in a small town in Westerlo, and I would play on the youth team, and my coach was on the adult team, and my ultimately, I guess the goal would be that I would try to get on the professional team. Within 3 months of being in Belgium, I was just drunk
Wow.
every day and every night, and kind of in places that I didn't understand the language and didn't know where I was, and I came home in my senior year in high school. That's when I really got um, involved in drugs heavily. And
Yeah.
so, that took me deeper into crime. I became a drug dealer, lots of criminal charges, weapons charges.
Jeez.
Um, yes,
Serious shit.
possession for distribution. And, I was a good kid, but when I used, I just became this alter ego that would do
Was this like?
anything.
I'm just kind of curious.
Yeah,
Like, it sounds torturous, but
yeah.
was it like episodic? Were you like clean for a few months and then
Yeah, it's a
go
good
off,
question. Yeah,
get back into it, or how did
yeah,
it work for you?
Mark. The interesting thing was whenever I would get clean, I would instantly want to start playing sport again, right? Like I'd move into who I am, and what would happen is I'd cling on and grit it and try to stay clean, and maybe I'd be clean for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and I'd go and have a beer, and I'd have one beer, and
Right.
2 hours later, I'm getting high on methamphetamine. And then the next morning, I'm selling meth again. And I'd move into,
Wow.
so it was like that
Okay.
fast, right? Like I
Yeah.
would, as soon as I'd relapse, the crime would come with it because I knew I kind of needed to support myself. And the only way that I wouldn't let the addiction take over wholesale was to control it through selling it. And
Interesting.
so I would then go on another run for 2 years until I'd get arrested. Or so what would start with one beer? I mean, really, if you were to rewind the tape, say I'm in 2005, I ended up in jail again for a distribution and possession of firearms. But if you had rewinded the tape on that run started a year and a half before, where I might have been clean and went and had a beer at a bar, and then next thing, full blown relapse, and then
Wow.
from there I'm selling drugs, and that's just how ferocious it was for me.
Wow.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. It was pretty bad. I tried to go in the. I had a couple influential men in my life that were ex-U.S. Marines.
Hmm.
One was my soccer coach, who was a cop, and he fought really hard for me, but also was very hard on me. Was very happy to come and arrest me, and
Hmm.
but at the same time had a lot of time for me, and he had convinced me to go into the U.S. Marines. So I was getting courted by the U.S. Marines when I was 17, and I ended up going to jail. And when I got out, I connected with the Marines, and they were very good to me. Like they were very good at getting us young men who were a bit wayward. You know, they would take us to events, and there was the Oakland Naval Yard, and they take us bowling. And I remember when I was about 18, I got out of a short jail sentence, and they came and picked me up, and they took me to take the ASVAB. But I didn't get a high enough score on the ASVAB without having a high school diploma,
Yeah. Yeah.
and uh, and so that I missed that boat, and by the time I was probably ready to do it again, I was already back, in trouble. So
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I can see how the military is like a forced recovery. If you catch the individual at the right place, because then you're at boot camp and you're surrounded by discipline and positive energy. Well, it may not look positive to the outside, but people who are motivating you to be your best self and bring out qualities that maybe you didn't see in yourself. The military training is really good for that. Although it's not necessarily going to heal addiction per se. It's a
yeah,
it's a container that can get someone the right tools or habits, right, that you can then do the work yourself.
yeah.
um,
When I was 26, I kind of had enough of alcohol and didn't really know what to do. I was in Australia, and I just jumped on a plane and went to the French Foreign Legion.
did
And
you?
yeah, dude, I rocked up at their fort in Paris, and fucking I went there, and like I it was madness. Like we're a bunch of kids that are just all over the joint, and they're yelling at us in French. They refuse to speak Mark. It was a
So what is?
crazy.
No, I
Yes.
I didn't remember. I don't
Yeah.
remember this. So what did
Yeah.
you do? Just like go knock on the gate and say, "Hey, I want to be in
Literally
the
did.
Legion."
Yeah. Yeah. I had no money. I left Australia, and I like didn't tell my parents what I was doing. And I was like, I'm gonna go to the French Foreign Legion because like this is gonna be the answer. And so
Let's talk about that siren call, because not many people really realize that. Like the Foreign Legion has open arm policy, right? If you can get through
yeah.
the training and you commit, right, there's some significant benefits if you stick around for a long enough time, right?
Yeah. So you know what? In hindsight, if I was the person I was today, I wouldn't have thought like that would have been an interesting move. But I think the condition that I went there in, like I
Hmm.
was not fit. I could have probably hacked it because I was athletic enough. You
Yeah.
had to do like 6 pull-ups. I was a bit concerned about that, but like the running and all that, like wasn't an issue. But yeah, you rock up there, you knock on the door, they come, they take your passport, and you're literally kind of sequestered in a room. It was a bit like jail. So like I wasn't too uncomfortable with the process, right? Like you're in a waiting room during the
Right.
day, you're eating lots of croissants, and you're not getting a lot of protein. And so the drill sergeants, like you're getting yelled at continuously in French, and you've got no idea what they're saying. And because they're already French and a bit kind of arrogant, they're not gonna
Right.
and they know you're like American or whatever. They're not catering for you, right? So um, I was there, and I ended up bolting after a month and a half because what ends up happening is you go to a boot camp, and that's when you start to kind of for real become a legionnaire. But that was a really interesting experience being there because there's a lot of singing, a lot of marching. You're doing a lot of work. It's
Hmm.
kind of free labor for them too in many
Right.
ways, and there's not a lot of rules. I mean, you would know this as a military man. Like the French Foreign Legion, you go there, you're not really part of the traditional framework, so they kind of can use you how they want, from what I understand. Like they're fighting a lot of insurgencies, and
Right.
they're not doing traditional things, and that's where, from what I understand, they send the French Foreign Legion where they don't really want to send the French military.
That's right. Yeah. It's
You're
like
expandable,
it's kind of
right?
like an NGO private military contractor. It's the weirdest thing. Yeah.
Yeah, like yeah, it is weird because yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, you're effectively mercenaries, and there were a lot of people from of African ex colonies that were,
Right.
they didn't have much. That they were poor. That was their only option. And then there were people that were coming from, like, random people coming from Japan and China, where you're like, what did you do? Like, because there were people there to escape crime,
So,
right? Like,
right.
yeah. So that was an interesting.
Fascinating. Well, you made it a month and a half, so good job with that. It would have been interesting to hear more about what that experience would have been
I
like if it
know.
wasn't your path, huh? So where did you find your break from the addictions? What was the turning point?
Yeah. So I left the United States to came to Australia. The American um, immigration, they canceled my green card effectively, right? So my parents are U.S. citizens. My siblings are, but I had never bothered to become a U.S. citizen. Being born in Australia and kind of getting involved in crime and never having time to go become a U.S. citizen was to my detriment, because after
Right.
9/11, uh, American policy changed even for domestic criminals, right? Just became a lot more severe. So anyone they could boot out, they started to really look at, um,
Hmm.
and and rightfully so, I think. So I uh, I ended up coming back to Australia, and one of the things I said to my dad when I left, at that time, I'd hacked a business degree in San Francisco. I'd used an ex girlfriend's transcripts to get into a pretty prestigious university. Yep, that's a true story, Mark. Never
Oh,
graduated high school and used her transcripts, and I scanned it and submitted it with my name, and I was in.
unbelievable.
And yeah, it was crazy. And I hacked this degree, and so and I knew I could put some sentences together and I could write, and I thought, well, look, I'll come to Australia and I'll start over. And within 18 months, I had 3 DUIs, and here in Australia, they're very serious with drunk driving.
Are they? Yeah.
So I was facing a prison sentence here, and I just had this moment of clarity where I was standing in my living room, and I'm 28 or something, and I just I knew I was done, and the
Hmm.
obsession to drink was kind of immediately lifted. I think there was a crack in my armor, and it was one of those, what we call in recovery, gift of desperation
Hmm.
moments.
Hmm.
And I knew that I needed to get sober, and I knew how to get sober. But something else was critical there. I, first of all, I made the decision that if I was going to go to jail again here in Australia, I was going to go sober, and I was going to do things on my terms.
Hmm.
And in many ways, that was the first decision I've ever made to in the right direction,
Hmm.
right? To get my life back on track. And so that was one critical component, making this decision that I was done and I had enough. And the other was I had met an entrepreneur in Melbourne who is um, extremely high net worth now, and he was very young at the time, and he was building a business. And I was working for him as a salesperson, and I told him everything, and he didn't fire me. Not only did he not fire me, he decided to take me under his wing. And so,
Wow.
I guess what I'm trying
So
to say is
you found a mentor, and you had a higher self kind of slap
correct.
in the head
Yeah,
that said, you
those
know what?
those two things,
Yeah,
right,
and they
Mark?
happen
Because
around the same time, huh?
exactly. So if I really break that moment down, I think having surrendering and kind of being at my knees made me completely teachable. And then I've got someone saying, here's a path, here's a
Hmm.
new identity, right?
Right.
Because I see something in you you don't see in yourself, and I can help bring that out in you. And here's the actual path.
Hmm.
So follow me. So now,
Hmm.
so I'm on my knees, I'm at a surrender point, but I'm given another option. And I think that was a critical moment for me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah.
I imagine, this is just how the universe works. When you start allowing the positive aspects of consciousness, spirit, God, whatever, to reveal itself, to flow through you, through us, then simultaneously we have the aperture open wider, and we see the support. The support was always there before, but our aperture was closed due to our addiction, due to our contracted state of being, and so we just couldn't perceive the support that was there for us all along, or the information, the path, the way out. So it's so interesting that every time I talk to someone who's had kind of like this bottom of the barrel, like I'm on my knees moments, and they make a shift, well, almost immediately the mentor shows up, right? Or the positive path shows up. And it's only because the aperture is suddenly expanded and they can now see what was already there.
Mm. Yeah, Mark, I think that the ability to see the connections
Right.
in life, and I ebb and flow with that ability depending on where my spirit is.
That's right.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. I think keeping our levels of awareness open and being in tune, and not on autopilot,
That's right. Yeah.
is important.
I think that, to me, the positivist aspect of just why we practice, right? And then we'll call practice. You can throw habits in there, habit formation, training for something, any attempt to become better. When you get more evolved, what you actually realize is all of that is just ultimately an attempt to scrub away anything that's contracting us. It's really not by it's not a process of adding something that is missing from your life. It's a process of scrubbing and cleaning all the mud off the filter. So back to that aperture example, like, or metaphor, is so that you can perceive more. And as you
Yeah.
perceive more, it's not you reaching out, it's actually what's flowing through you.
Mm.
What's flowing through the body mind is able to now, it has more access. The mind is working better, so now it's basically lighting up more possibilities, more opportunities. You're seeing more connections, and you're feeling that flow or that movement, right? That was heretofore stuck energetically. I know it's a little bit of a metaphysical take on it, but back to this idea of what, who's the doer and what's really happening here. Energy is flowing through this body mind, AJ body mind, or this Mark body mind. And the only thing that I, known as, when I identify him as Mark, the only thing I can do is block that source, block that energy. Right. So if I could just get the heck out of the way, this is why, like, surrendering, the idea of surrender and acceptance and forgiveness is so important, because that's removing the crud. That
Mm.
gets yourself out of the way, opens up the aperture.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different perspective than like grasping for some achievement in personal growth or spiritual development
Mm.
or even healing,
Mm.
right? And the Western model is always this grasping. I'm going to achieve this. I'm going to get that. I'm going to go for this. I'm going to go for that. And this model that I'm describing is more just, okay, that's fine. But what we're really trying to do is subtract, not add to our lives.
Yeah.
Subtract the negative. Anyways,
You'll
just a little bit of a Mark data dump there.
No, I'm 100%
Take
with
it
you,
for what
Mark.
it's worth, which is
No, I'm
probably
with you,
nothing.
and I would add, in the recovery community, you see people when they newly get sober, they're on this mission to accumulate information. They're on the spiritual marketplace, right? Because they
That's
have to be, right? And these are, they become a bit annoying. They kind of pontificate. They're the ones that share all this stuff with
right.
everyone that'll listen, and they kind of,
The ego
uh,
is now glomming onto the being the one in recovery and who's making all this progress. And
yeah. But I look at those individuals with um, with love as well,
of
because I
course,
see what's happening now. To the person that hasn't gone through that process, they get a bit like, but what ends up happening as a person stays sober longer and they're doing the work, I think they move into a place where they've read all the books, they've accumulated all the information, and you kind of realize that all that information is saying the same thing. And you're
Mhm.
not necessarily using that information. Like for me, when I read books now and I'm interested in, let's say, I read your book. I'm reading that book or your book to not look at what information can I accumulate and stack upon, but how do I engage that information to then r- reduce the stuff that's getting in my way.
That's right. Yeah. That's
It's a
exactly what I was
process of
just saying.
reduction,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
It's a
And that's
reduction.
exactly what you're saying. And I completely agree. I mean, because I guess what we subscribe to is that ultimately within our heart and soul and being, we know the answers.
That's right. It's all, air quotes within, right? That's
Mm,
why meditation, contemplation, all the, spiritual practice, even therapy, Western psychotherapy is all, you're looking within. You're not looking out there to solve your problem. You're looking within, right? And so that idea of going within is not one of attainment. It's one of subtraction. And the yogic term is neti neti, looking at your life and saying, it's not this, not that, not this, not that, not this, not that. Get rid of all that stuff.
yeah.
So when you look at addiction, for instance, for you is it was alcohol, and alcohol then led to meth. So ultimately there was some trauma and or some genetic programming that allowed alcohol to be, a dominant force in your life. And so when you begin to do the neti neti, you're like, okay, alcohol's not good for me, but there's this massive attraction to it. That's what we call the addiction, right? And so you got to trace that back to its source by saying not this, not that, and keep on removing things that trigger the alcohol until you get to that emotional kind of 0 point
Mm,
that it could be psychophysical, it's biological, it's energetic, right? And so you kind of pierce it from those different perspectives
mm,
and bring it to light, so to speak, by subtracting everything down to that 0 point. And then once you get there, generally the addiction can go away. I'm not saying this is easy work. It takes a lot of courage, right?
yeah. And
But it's
reprogramming,
but the
man.
point is, it's an inward journey. It's not outward searching for something to replace it. And this is why, like with habit forming, which is I know your kind of thing. A lot of people say, yeah, well, one way to get rid of a bad habit is to replace it with something good. And I said, well, that gets you about halfway there,
Yeah.
you know. But you also
Yeah.
have to then simultaneously go within and ferret out through that neti neti process of why the energy was stuck in that bad habit to begin with.
Well, what I find, and you and I've had this conversation before, for some, like when I got sober, I started running crazy amounts of distance, right? Like
Which
just
is
just and
another
I was
addiction. So that's what I just
correct.
talked about. You just
Yeah.
did the replacement
Yep.
theory.
Yep. I
And
did.
that's good. That's like it's a better habit to go out run 20 miles a day than it is to drink 20 bottles of beer, for sure.
But to your point, this is where you went, and I mean, I'm lucky that I'm in 12 step, right? Because I think if you have a good sponsor, they'll recognize that you're just effectively switching one for the other.
Right.
And some people never move beyond that. They'll just replace alcohol and drugs with something that is less harmful or something that is better for them, but they're never able to. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I always tell my sponsees that at some point in your recovery you're going to have to be able to sit in a room by yourself without going insane.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's
Like,
right. Yeah. So let me try to analyze what you're saying a little bit because
yeah.
I saw this in CrossFit. I had a CrossFit gym for
Yeah,
10
that's
years,
right.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so that beautiful program is a magnet for addicts.
Mm,
It's a magnet, right?
it
It's people
is.
just
Yeah.
transferring one addiction to another, right? Usually it's like eating
Mm,
or alcohol or sex or whatever, and then they transfer that addiction to CrossFit, and so that's great. They get super healthy, right? Their bodies look amazing, and they're just as messed up as they were before. They're just physiologically a little healthier.
they look better.
They look better, right? And they're still just dropping all sorts of hand grenades of dysfunction around every relationship they have. And it's because
Yeah.
wherever you go, there you are. It doesn't matter if you're,
Yeah.
it might help if your body's a little healthier. And I say that only because if your body's healthier, then you're going to be able to do the inner work better because your
Mm,
brain's going to be more functional
yeah.
and, you'll be able to meditate better. But if you haven't developed the self awareness that it's still an addictive pattern, and you're hiding from something, like you said, you're not able to sit in a room without going crazy alone, then you're always running from that.
Mm,
And I interview a ton of people who are always trying to accomplish the next latest and greatest thing. And I ask you, like, what are you running from? Like, why at 72 do you need to be known as the oldest guy
mm,
who, in the world to do this latest crazy feat? Like, is
mm,
your ego really still trying to, you know, still needs that external validation because you're not, you just don't have the sense that you're good enough yet or worthy. And so
mm.
find that trauma trigger and recognize your worthiness. And if you still want to do those things, great, but don't do it because you're running from yourself. I know
Yeah.
I went a little bit wandering there, but
No, no, I think it's good to riff like this. Like for me, when I started ultra running, I had already been many years sober. And I think I'm grateful for that because funnily enough, when I got sober in 2010, I started hiking. And then because I like to move, I started running with the gear. But I didn't know there was actually a sport at that time, trail running. I didn't know. And I'm glad I didn't know
yeah,
because I think if I would have known then, I would have just gone off because that would have been a very easy way for me to just kind of alleviate the madness that was between my ears. But I didn't, and I did the work, and then I came back to running later after I did an MBA, and it was a new crucible. It was a very intentional thing because I was kind of looking. So I have crucibles in my life, like these times where I just kind of that's what the burpee challenge is. It's a new crucible for me where I just know I need an existential. I need existential pressure,
yeah, yeah. To
and you know what I'm
cook
trying to say.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah, you know what I
that's
mean.
why we have Kokoro. It's a great way to really get unstuck from things that are you're aware of, right? You're not hiding from
Yeah.
them, you're aware of them, but in that intensity of that challenge you can break through and accelerate your growth. So deliberately designing a crucible challenge or participating in one with awareness that it's going to surface a lot of patterns and a lot of things that you resist, and you have to burn through that resistance. It's a very useful training tool.
Let me ask you something, Mark. So I find that when I get into a place where my demons come up, every few years things come up for me. And I find that, for instance, I had gone through some challenges a couple months ago, and I really started to go back to a meditative practice. But
Right.
I found that being still at times actually inflamed what was going on for me. And
Sure.
I needed to move. And what's your view on that? Like, is there a time where meditation can create more mental chatter that kind of digs you more in the hole? Like, because
No, no,
it,
no. Okay, so here's my perspective on this. The
yeah,
chatter's there. When you're constantly in movement, you just don't notice it. There's something else at the forefront of your consciousness. Your mind operates at many levels. The key is to bring those levels into your awareness, and then to begin to do a couple different things. One is to distance yourself from all that busyness, all that stuff, right? And this is the process of witnessing, right? So beginning, first starts at mind level where you literally are like partitioning your mind and you're literally setting up shop and you're beginning to distance yourself, disengage from being grabbed by or being drawn into the thoughts. And so
mm,
the example there is like you're having this anger moment and you're just like, I'm so angry versus That's anger still comes up, but you're watching it now from a distance, saying, wow, look at that, there's anger arising, and just letting it pass and not getting, completely drawn up. So first is at the mind level, then second, it just naturally, the aperture opens, and it's pure awareness, right? It is the stillness that's watching AJ, right? Watching everything that's happening. So the thought, back to your question, the thoughts are always there, but when people first sit down and meditate, all of a sudden all the externalities are gone, and boy,
Mm.
what was just a background hum that they barely notice is now like a 100-piece symphony.
Mm.
It's like this cacophony in their minds, and literally is maddening. It's like, oh my God, I can't stand this, right? And so then they think, okay, well, fine, that's fine. Go do something, right? So one of the precursors to or tools to really begin to get a hold of that mind current that's all over the place is concentration, and endurance training is a form of concentration, which is why it's so valuable. Or just a mantra, or box breathing. For us, we just do box breathing for arousal control and concentration, attention control. Those three things. Just focus on the pattern. Inhale 5, hold 5, exhale 5, hold 5. And so
Mm.
then what that does is it takes your dominant mind stream and it narrowly focuses on that one thing. And when it does that, then all the other stuff starts to eventually slowly settle down a little bit. And you can find that kind of that stillness again. Then when you take your foot off the gas pedal, that stuff will arise. But because you've had that concentration, you've got now the mental stability and the power of your mind, then you can create that shift with your mind where you're watching it instead of just caught up in it. So
Mm.
concentration is really important to practice as a prerequisite. That's like meditation boot camp is concentration camp. And then you go into meditation as kind of becoming mindful aware of the content. And you can work with the content of your mind.
No, that's brilliant. I my relationship with meditation, I was a solid meditator, and then I had kids, and then I found it was the first thing that kind of went, because I was quite structured in around my practice, and then when I wasn't able to meet my practice, I just felt like I let myself down, and then over time it became inconsistent, and then
Yeah.
I completely stopped, and I've reintroduced it, but trying to find the right practice at the right. So I wake up in the morning with a lot of negativity in my mind and a lot of physical energy that I feel requires me to move.
Yeah, that's
And
fine.
so when I try to sit still in the morning, I don't feel that is the best time to meditate. But then when I try to do it at the end of the day after the work and the kids, I'm a bit shattered, and I oscillate between box breathing or like um, concentration meditation to more of a um, another style of meditation where I'm just more spacious and I'm just kind
Yes.
of letting things arise. And being a habit orientated person, it's one of the things in my program where I still haven't found the right framework, if that
Think
makes
of it
sense.
just as sequencing, like in a workout or a training program. It's just sequencing. So it's absolutely right that if you have a lot of energy in your physical energy and physiological energy, we need to move that energy. One way to move it is with the breath. Another is through movement, exercise. So if you're like that, then the movement comes before the meditation.
Hmm.
So you're right there. But you're also right in saying that, wow, by the end of the day, your mind and your willpower and you're just you everything's, the mental strength has been diminished, and so it's going to be more difficult, right?
Hmm.
Without training, to do your meditation. So think about it this way. Think about your physical training and your breath work and your meditation all as the same training thing. And so you wake up, and first of all, your practice starts the moment you open your eyes, or the moment your inner eyes open, and the world wakes up to you, and you're like, oh yeah, here's AJ, here's another day. What a grateful opportunity, huge opportunity I have today to
Hmm.
continue my evolutionary journey, because it didn't have to be this way. And so your practice starts immediately with intercepting the negative thought patterns and overriding it with a mantra and with gratitude. So your practice actually, and you could call that a meditation. It's more of a contemplation practice.
Mm.
And then, okay, so then whatever else you do, prep, but then you're going to go do your physical movement to move that energy. And that's concentration training, especially for an endurance athlete. And it's breath control training because you're controlling your breathing. So you're combining these three elements into one. Then when we're done with the movement, before, don't just, hop in the shower and go about your day. You take an extra 20 minutes now to use the breath practice, box breathing, to turn inward. So now you're going from the hard physical movement not to just moving the breath, which is going to move the mind. And then you turn around where you take your attention from outward focus to inward focus. And so you do that for 5 or 7 minutes, and then, or maybe 10, and then just let go of all efforting and go into that spacious awareness space. And you'll have already burned off all the energy of agitation. You've done the concentration. You've done the turning around, turning inward, right? You're turning
Mm.
attention, inward. And now your mind is much more prepped for that
Mm.
spacious awareness.
That's actually a good plan because I will always exercise. And
Yeah,
you're right. Like the best time for me and many people like me, I would imagine where, and I mean, Mark, you would know this better than anyone. Like, I believe this to be true that yoga, the physical yoga, was really done as preparation for
that's right.
meditation, right?
Of course.
It wasn't
That's
this
right. That's
whole thing like
exactly
what it
right.
is today.
The way that was sequenced was
Yeah.
foundational ethical principles first, like get your life in order, eat
Mm,
well, sleep well, don't overdo it with, anything,
mm,
kind of middle path. And then we layer in the exercise, the asana, and that's to make the body healthy and the brain healthy and to give you the discipline. And then we work with the breath, right?
mm,
And then after the breath, we work with tuning out our sensory perceptions to bring our awareness from the outer world into the inner space.
mm.
And then we get into concentration training. And only after all that do you actually do, air quotes, meditation in kind of the
Yeah.
yogic sense.
Yeah.
This has been a phenomenal conversation. I want to be sensitive to our time here. We've been going for a
Yep.
while, but what, because
Mm,
you and I could talk about this stuff forever. We
mm,
might bore the,
mm.
out of the audience who's listening to this, or they might be like, wow,
Yeah, I'm
I
sure
wish
they
we had
love
these
it.
conversations more often. So I'd love to get that feedback. So you got this world record thing coming up. What else is going on in your life?
Yeah. So, world record attempt, starting a new business. So, Ultra Habits is um, part of a a bigger plan. So here in Australia, I work with companies to help them grow um, in terms of their revenues, and I also kind of focus on sales training within companies, incorporating habits into that, so
Right.
sales habits, and we also look at the kind of their inner world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting a new business called Ultra Growth Ventures, which is going to be focusing on helping businesses grow, but the individuals within those businesses grow as well. That's happening
Right.
January 1, 2024. But
Nice.
this world record attempt is really, and you made a great point earlier. I am in a place now where I just knew that I needed a new crucible, something that would really stretch me.
Right.
And I think I was kind of thinking about what that was, and had the benefit of listening to your buddy Goggins, and I was like, yeah, it was the right time for me to listen to Goggins. He's not always for me, but there's a time and place for Goggins.
Sure.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
I, I had to listen to him, and things became a bit clear. And so this event, we're going to be trying to raise $1 million for mental health
Awesome.
uh, here in
Yeah.
Australia, and so that's going to be happening Jan 1, 2024. But yeah, just really focusing on, the family, wife, um, having conversations like I do with you, and yeah, just optimizing. It's really what it's about for me.
That's awesome. I can't wait to hear about that. About all of that, especially the world record attempt, and we'll share our little secrets.
Yeah, that'd be
With
great.
that.
It's such a, we talk about the connections, and like I honestly didn't know you did that. Like what's the chances of that, right? Like cuz I've been
Right.
thinking, okay, well, how am I going to go about this? Who's done this before? I
Right.
mean, that's just weird, right? Like, there
Yeah.
you go.
And
So,
there's someone in our tribe, the Unveiled Mind Sealfit tribe, who's that same year got the world record for 12 hours.
yeah.
And he
Crazy.
did like, I can't remember the number, but it's a pretty insane number for 12 hours. I forget what it was. I even forgot it. I'd have to like dig around to figure out who that was. If you're listening, reach out to me.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's awesome. And where are folks, if someone's like really inspired to learn more about and follow your journey, where do you like to send them? Is it social media? Or do you
Yeah,
have a
there's a website, so it's www.ultrahabits.co. That's
Okay,
www.ultrahabits.co.
check. Awesome. Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes. RJ, it's been a real pleasure chatting with you again. And I love, just mixing up, trying to figure out how to optimize and how to overcome trauma. And like, it's really valuable stuff. Like you said, right now, mental health is a big problem worldwide. There's a lot of negativity and violence in the world, and people are
Mm,
suffering from that. And so these conversations are really important. So I appreciate you.
yes. Yeah, this is the anecdote.
That's right. All right, brother.
Thanks, Mark.
Be well.
You
Hooyah.
too, mate.